Hello, this is Dr. Esmacher, and welcome to the final installment of U.S. History since 1877. Today, we are going to talk about September 11th, 2001, and we're going to cover the War on Terrorism. So, this is a very focused class. While we are talking about George W. Bush's time in office, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about his domestic policies and struggles, in part because we're focusing on 9/11 and its aftermath and what it means for Americans at home. Part of the reason that I choose to stop my course at the say 2007-2008 mark is that number one, historians love a cushion of time because it's very difficult for us to see trends and patterns in events without the benefit of hindsight. So ideally, historians like to have about at least a 20-year cushion before starting to kind of extrapolate the importance or the meaning or the connection of events. But because the war on terror does have very immediate consequences, in the early 2000s. That's why I'm getting a little closer than 20 years to present, because as of this recording, we are in the year 2020. So we will not get to Barack Obama and post 2008. So just putting that out there now, we're going to end by talking about the legacy thus far of September 11th and the war on terror. But this is, as I will note repeatedly, a continually unfolding story. We're not done yet. A lot of the places we're going to talk about the United States getting involved in the early 2000s, we still have troops there. So just know that this is one of those many, many reasons why typically I don't get too close to present, because it is going to be a little bit more difficult to see even longer trends, but we have enough distance where we can kind of start to make some connections and make a few educated guesses as to longer term impacts. So let's talk about W, or George W. Bush. So George W. Bush is the second Bush to serve as president after his father, George H.W. Bush, served as a one-term president from 1989 to 1993. And the younger Bush, his primary experience in politics had been as the governor of Texas. And his time in office, because he is inaugurated in early 2001, is going to be very much defined by September 11th and responses to September 11th. Bush's foreign policy is going to be defined by the war on terrorism. Now, that's not the only thing going on while George W. Bush is in office from 2001 to 2009. There are a number of domestic challenges, the first of which is how does the war on terror affect civil liberties of Americans, which we're going to talk about at the tail end of today's discussion. There's also Hurricane Katrina, one of the biggest natural disasters in U.S. history, and the very slow response by FEMA and other federal government agencies will earn criticism for George W. Bush. We also have the United States in a recession as Bush enters office, and then the housing bubble will collapse a little bit later in about the year 2008. So that has to be dealt with by both Bush and then the incoming president as of early 2009, Barack Obama. And really, all of this stuff that happens during his time in office, Bush's response to it is driven by his particular political platform on domestic issues, which he nicknamed compassionate conservatism. So, what exactly does that mean? Well, Bush will define it for us here. And I quote, "I call my philosophy and approach compassionate conservatism. It is compassionate to actively help our fellow citizens in need. It is conservative to insist on responsibility and results. And with this hopeful approach, we will make a real difference in people's lives." So what does this mean in terms of policy? Bush is going to be very much focused on poverty at home and abroad, fitting into that sense of wanting to help people in need, on improving education, and primarily on helping people help themselves. So while Bush wants to help people who are struggling, he doesn't want to create a culture of dependency. So in many cases, this is very reminiscent of concerns about welfare and aid and dependency that we see during the Reagan era of the 1980s. Bush will also have much softer rhetoric on topics like immigration. He, on social issues, will try to de escalate the harsh tone of the 1990s culture war, which, as we mentioned, provoked extreme and radical responses and violence in some fringes of the conservative movement. In terms of economy, Bush will go back to Reagan's wheelhouse and dip into supply side or trickle down economics, with the 2001 tax cut passed to address the recession, the biggest tax cut in US history up to that point. However, like with Ronald Reagan, because they're embracing the trickle down theory, the biggest tax cuts are going to be reserved for the wealthy and for corporations, with the idea that they will take that savings and taxes and invest that money into new business ventures. So, this was Bush's kind of operating framework for domestic policy. But because of circumstances early in his presidency, his domestic policy will forever be overshadowed by September 11th.